There's a good reason why so many movies that are designed to be scary are set in the woods. Really, the woods at night. And if you go even further, most of them are like a cabin in the woods at night, right? It's because being in the woods at night, as human beings, checks a lot of fear boxes. You have the isolation factor. You're far away from society. That scares us. We don't want to be isolated. You feel more vulnerable that way. It checks the darkness fear factor. As humans, we're mostly afraid of the dark because you don't know what's around you or what's looking at you. You don't have the advantage of, city lights beaming in. You're kind of probably removed from lots of light pollution, so you're kind of like in total darkness. And I think the third fear check in the box would be the fact that it's easy to hide in the forest. You don't know what's watching you because there's trees everywhere. You have animals, predators potentially, or even predatory humans that could be hiding at every turn. Hollywood has picked up on that and made bunches of movies of, the whole cabin in the woods trope where somebody's isolated and scared in the woods because it works. It's something that we are afraid of. And so today's story starts off a lot like all the other kind of cliche cabin in the woods scary stories, but this one, it's different. This one scared the heck out of me because as I read the account of what happened in this cabin in the woods, I imagined myself being in this guy's position and thinking about the psychological trauma that this would have on you. And I've actually had a literal cabin in the woods scary experience, and you can check it out. It's one of my top videos on my YouTube channel. It's What I Saw in My Room Still Haunts Me. You can check it out. It's my own cabin in the woods story. But having been through something like that, I was able to put myself in this guy's position, and this story terrifies me. So as you're listening to today's story, try to put yourself in this guy's position and think to yourself, what would you have done? But before we get into today's story, if this type of content appeals to you, the kind of strange, dark, and mysterious that I'm going to deliver to you in a story format, if that's kind of your thing, I would ask you to please gently obliterate the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of these strange, dark, and mysterious uploads that I do every week. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2010, a 17-year-old boy is devastated to find out that his father had suddenly passed away. And it really sent shockwaves through the whole family. Not only because now they're grieving the loss of their father, their husband, but because so much of their daily lives they spent together. I mean, this was a very close family, and one of the things that they liked to do as a family was they owned a cabin. It was around Mount Bachelor in Oregon, this beautiful mountain where you can go snowboarding and skiing. They had this family cabin up there where in the wintertime, this family would spend a lot of time there. They would go up there as a family, spend time there as a family. It was this wonderful retreat. And as they're trying to settle the estate of their husband, their father, they're trying to figure out what they want to do with this cabin, because all of a sudden this place that, used to bring them so much joy and was a place of very fond memories suddenly felt kind of hollow. It just would never be the same. And so they decided that they were actually going to sell this cabin. And the 17-year-old boy was just really upset about this. He was very close to his father. He had some very fond memories of going hunting and skiing and snowboarding with his dad at this cabin. And so once the cabin was actually put up for sale by this boy's mother, he asked if, before they actually sell it, could he spend some time up there, I guess paying his respects in a way to his father. But he just wanted one more opportunity to spend some time in that cabin. And his mom said, go for it, take as many days as you want, go up and hang out in the cabin. But when you come back, we are going to sell the place. So his father had actually willed to his son his vehicle. And so the 17-year-old boy loads up his father's car. He goes out and he buys some snacks and drinks, heads up to the cabin in Oregon with the family dog whose name was Midnight. And his plan was just to go up to this cabin and basically try to enjoy being in this space one last time. Don't think about it as this place that now has no meaning because his father had died, but rather a place that he wanted one last positive memory before it was forever gone from their family. And so he gets up there, makes his way to the cabin, and he settles in for what turned out to be an abbreviated stay at the cabin. So in order to understand this story, we need to talk a little bit about the layout of the cabin itself. The cabin was 2 stories. and it was built into a mountain, Mount Bachelor in Oregon. And so the back half of the cabin was kind of settled into the mountain. So there were no windows, save a little sliver of window that fed into the bathroom, actually, in the back of the cabin. The front of the cabin was this beautiful, double-decker cabin with, windows on the second floor that fed into the master bedroom. On the second floor, there was a walk-out balcony that kind of jutted out a few feet from the second deck. The first floor, you could see in through all these beautiful windows. There was a sitting area, like a living room and a TV, and then a small kitchen as well. So the cabin was built in an area that was heavily forested. So they had to clear out, a bunch of trees to even build this cabin when the family had this built years and years ago. And so they really only cleared away the front section of trees so that there was a clear shot to the house, but the sides and the back were very heavily forested with these huge tall pine trees. And they basically had this little tiny driveway that fed in through all the trees, and you had this one kind of clearing in front of the cabin. So if you were on the second floor of the cabin, where there's the master bedroom, there's a bed up there, and you were looking out that window, you'd be looking over the balcony out into a clearing, basically. But there's a tree line, 100 yards past that clearing that's very dense. And there's actually a couple of trees, fairly prominent trees, that are sitting in front of the cabin that they did not cut down. One of which, for the story, we'll call it the sitting tree. Parallel to the ground, about 20 feet up, was this beautiful branch that looked perfect for a whole bunch of people sitting on it. But it was 20 feet above the ground, and there wasn't really any way to climb up to it, and no one was trying to climb this tree. But there's this tree that basically has a seat, if you will. Like the branch is like a seat that is looking directly into the cabin. And that's going to matter later in the story. So clearing in front of the cabin with this one kind of sitting tree, and then a very dense forest 360 degrees beyond, that one clearing. So when the 17-year-old gets to the cabin, he goes inside, he puts his drinks in the fridge, puts his snacks on the counter, he hooks up his PlayStation to the TV, and he's just like having a great time. His dog Midnight is roaming around, enjoying being at the cabin. And, he's having a great time. And over the course of the first 2 days that he was there, it was everything he hoped it would be. It was like he was bonding with his father one last time. It was a peaceful time that he was there. He was happy to be there. And he was just enjoying himself, eating snacks and playing video games for a couple of days. He actually left a couple times to go snowboarding too. But on the third day that he was there, things started to get pretty weird. So on the third day when he got up, it had snowed dramatically the night before. A couple of feet of snow on the ground, still snowing pretty heavily. And he's like, I just don't feel like brushing off my car and trying to go to the store or go to the slopes to go snowboarding. I'm just gonna basically be shut in for the day. And he was excited about it. He's like, great, me and my dog Midnight can bomb around the inside and play some more video games and eat some more snacks and do whatever. Midday that day, Midnight needed to pee, so he went outside with Midnight and let Midnight run around and go to the bathroom. And while he's out there with his dog, he notices there are some footprints in the snow that looked relatively fresh. And this is the first time that he's left his cabin that day, so they aren't his. And his neighbors were pretty far away, and he figured that they were older, that they were probably not going to be trekking around the woods. So he's thinking to himself, I wonder who made these footprints. And he's looking at them, and they started in the woods. So the woods are not that far away from where he is. He's in a relatively small clearing just in front of his cabin. But he can tell these fresh footprints have come out of the woods. And they're basically right in front of this clearing. And he notices that they bank around and go to the back of his cabin and kind of go up onto the mountain. And he kind of just starts walking and following the footprints a bit, and they kind of disappear up onto the mountain behind his cabin. And he's not overly concerned or anything, but he definitely takes note that more than likely somebody was walking around his cabin. Maybe it was someone who got lost, maybe it was a neighbor. I mean, he's rationalizing it. He's thinking, you know what? It can't have been anything too serious. Obviously, they didn't knock on my door. They didn't need anything. And so he kind of writes it off. So that night, he stays up late playing video games, and his dog is sleeping next to his chair. And at some point, he's tired and he wants to go to bed. So he draws all the curtains, so blackout curtains around the downstairs, shuts all the blinds, and locks all the windows, all the doors, and heads upstairs to the lofted second floor where the master bedroom is. He gets in bed, turns off all the lights, everything's locked, everything's shut, the dog climbs into bed, and the dog would sleep up near his head. And suddenly the dog jumps up, still on the bed, and looks at the stairs leading downstairs to the front door. And its ears are perked up, like it's heard something. And it wasn't unusual for the dog to be a little jumpy, maybe it heard something. He wasn't overtly concerned. But when midnight, the dog jumps off the bed and sprints downstairs after having this sudden alertness. And he's listening. Now he is a little bit worried. He's thinking, well, I saw footsteps yesterday walking around my cabin, and now it's the middle of the night and my dog is downstairs acting like it's heard something. And he hears the dog, Midnight, pacing around the downstairs, like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Every indication is the dog wants to go outside. That's the noises that he's picking up that signal from the dog. And so finally, even though he's feeling a little bit unnerved by this, he decides to go down and see what Midnight wants. And so Midnight is by the door, ears perked up, very eager to go outside. It's pacing, and he thinks, you know what, she just needs to go to the bathroom. And so he opens the door with Midnight and he goes outside and he expects his dog to pee. But Midnight doesn't need to pee. Midnight starts kind of stalking around the corner and looking out across the clearing towards the sitting tree in that direction, and it just stops. And it's looking at something very intently, as if it spotted an animal or something in the woods. And so the boy is looking at the dog and he's kind of trying to encourage the dog to do its business so they can go back in the cabin. And he's starting to feel really uncomfortable. He's looking around, he's thinking like, okay, I don't know what's going on. Like, I'm a little bit concerned now. And he's sensing that Midnight is going at some point to try to take off after whatever she sees in the woods. And so preemptively, he grabs Midnight and says, all right, drags Midnight back in the house and shuts the door and locks it and takes one last look out the window of the door and just kind of looks out. I mean, it's dark, he doesn't have a light or anything. And he's like, man, that's creepy. Locks it, shuts the blinds, confirms everything downstairs is locked, does a sanity check to make sure everything is locked, and goes back upstairs with Midnight. Midnight did not want to go back upstairs. He had to practically drag her back upstairs. And then when they did get back in bed, Midnight refused to get in bed, but instead stood next to the bed looking at the stairs, wanting to go downstairs, periodically looking back at him and then down at the stairs. Midnight wanted to go back outside. So he's laying there in bed and he's taking full stock of the fact that his dog is very much on edge, but he's trying to fall back asleep, trying to convince himself that nothing weird is going on. And after about 30 minutes of that and being unsuccessful at falling asleep, as he's laying there, it's silent and all of a sudden he hears footsteps on his roof. Now the roof is right above his head. I mean, he's on the second floor. There is no attic. The roof is right there. And he hears about 6 footsteps. And he actually described it as something with hooves. And his dog instantly looks up as well. And they're both watching the ceiling as what sounds like hooves walking along the roof of this cabin. And it was so distinctive that immediately what he's thinking to himself is, how could a deer or a moose or something get on the roof of the house? There is no way, unless you leapt from a tree or had a ladder, for you to get on the roof. And how did we not hear, if they leapt from a tree or a ladder even, how didn't we hear a loud slamming sound when they first landed on the roof? Like, it's as if they've been there for a while and we just didn't know. And so then the footsteps stop, and at this point the dog stops looking at the roof and goes right to the balcony, which is shut. There's a door shut to the balcony and there's curtains drawn against the balcony, so he can't see what's out there. And so the 17-year-old boy is sitting in his bed and he's like, oh, I don't want to see what's on the porch. And he even says in his write-up about this that he's like, I'm a pretty tough guy, but I am in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, totally isolated. Like, I almost don't want to know what's going on outside. I just want to pretend it's not happening. But at some point, he musters the courage to go out on the balcony. And so he walks over very timidly to the door, and Midnight's there ready to go outside. And he takes a deep breath and he slides open the blackout curtains. But there's no light outside and there's no light inside, so it's just kind of darkness. And he can barely make out even just the snow that's on the balcony right in front of him. And he takes a deep breath and he unlocks the door and he opens it up. And the first thing he does is he turns and he looks up at the roof to see if there's a deer or a moose or something on the roof. There's nothing up there, and he's kind of peering around and he can't even see footprints up there. So in a way, he's kind of relieved, right? Like, I must have been imagining that. He had a flashlight, and so at this point, he's looking back at his roof of his cabin, and he shines the light real quick, and it's totally dark out, right? So this light goes very far, and he sees nothing. And the dog at this point, he can hear the dog making kind of some commotion below him. It's angling itself to look out in the direction of the sitting tree and out towards that tree line where the dog had originally been fixated on something in the tree line. And so just doing his diligence, the 17-year-old scans from the top of the roof where he sees nothing. He starts scanning over to the side of the house, right? Like this is the direction of the sitting tree. He's looking over here and he's scanning the tree line, just looking for anything that might have been on the roof. And he's looking and he's looking and he's looking, and then he gets to the sitting tree. And his flashlight stops on a man crouched on that perch 20 feet off the ground on the sitting tree, who looked very tall. He had his hands holding onto the branch right above him and his mouth is open. And he's holding onto the branch and he's looking directly at the boy. Unblinking, 100% focused on him. He's less than 50 yards away from him at this point. And it took him a second, the 17-year-old, to register what his flashlight was pointed at. And he panics and he drops it. And the dog reacts to the drop flashlight too. And because he's alone out here, he needs to protect himself. So he scoops that light back up and he shines it one more time to see, like, holy cow, like, what did I just see? And the guy on the branch is now gone. And he scans the ground. There's nothing. And he's terrified at this point. So he grabs his dog, throws Midnight back into the cabin, runs back in, shuts the door, locks it, closes the blinds, turns off his light, and literally gets back in bed with his dog. And he's now basically cowering on the bed. So at this point, they're sitting on the bed. Midnight is no longer acting like she wants to go outside. I think she's picking up potentially on the paranoia. Okay. At this point, the boy and his dog are sitting on the bed, and they're both scared at this point. Midnight, was fearsome while she was outside, but now that she's back inside, she doesn't want to go near the door either. She's rubbing up against him. She doesn't want to go anywhere. And they're sitting there, and the boy, all he's thinking to himself is, did I really just see that? It looked like an unnaturally tall man. How did he get in the tree? That's 20 feet off the ground. There's no way to get up into the tree. And why was it sitting there with its mouth open, staring at me? And who was on the roof? Was anything on the roof? And if this thing can get 20 feet up into a tree, it certainly can get on the roof of my cabin, I would imagine. But what was it? So he's having this type of thought process, and he's realizing too that it's not that late in the night. He still has hours until the sun's going to come up. And as he's basically panicking and feeding off his own paranoia, and it's getting worse and worse by the second, he hears tapping on the door, on the front door of his cabin. And his heart sinks, and he and his dog kind of look in the direction of the tapping, and he knows he's not going to go open the door. He knows the door is locked. He knows everything is locked. He's panicking that maybe it wasn't, but he knows he locked it. And the tapping just sounds like a finger tapping on the window. And at some point the tapping stops, and he thinks, okay, maybe they'll just go away. And then he hears what sounds like footsteps outside, and then tapping begins on the side of his cabin. Not the front door anymore, like the wall of the cabin. Now it's a little bit louder. The tapping continues up the side of the house, and then it stops. And he's sitting there and he's thinking, whatever this is walking around my cabin. And then he hears tapping on the little slit that is the window that feeds into the bathroom that's right behind the bedroom that he's in right now. So 6 feet away, maybe 10 feet away, whatever this thing is, it's now literally just a small pane of glass away, tapping on the glass. And so now he's petrified. And he's just hoping that this thing goes away. It doesn't. It goes to the other side of the cabin and starts tapping on the wall on the other side of the cabin, and makes it all the way back to the front, where it begins tapping on the glass of the front window, back to the door. And he's just thinking, like, whatever this is walking around my cabin, tapping all over my cabin. And then all the tapping stops. And his heart's racing. It's the middle of the night. He's in the middle of the woods somewhere. He's totally isolated. And then it's like his worst nightmare comes true. He hears footsteps on his balcony, and then tapping right on the big sliding glass doors of the door leading out to the balcony. And he knows that right behind a blackout curtain and a pane of glass is this tall man, more than likely, who's right on his balcony. And the tapping on the balcony goes on and on and on, and then all of a sudden it stops. And he's just waiting for it to open the door and come inside. But it doesn't. Instead, it goes on the roof, and it starts tapping on the roof directly above him. And the tapping continues all night. And so finally, the sun comes up. He hasn't slept all night, and he finally gets the courage to go over to the balcony and open up the curtains and see what's out there. And when he does, There is nothing out there, but there's footprints as if someone had been pacing on the balcony all night. He opens it up and he finally just jumps out and looks up on his roof. There's nothing on his roof. He can see all these footprints on his roof. He looks down and it's like a racetrack of footprints all around his house. Someone had been basically stalking his house all night, and then the footsteps retreat all the way to the sitting tree and then go back into the woods. He packed up his stuff, he left, and he couldn't have been happier that the family sold that cabin because he was never going to go back. So to this day, he has no idea what it was. And even if it was just a person who was tapping on your windows and your walls and your roof and your balcony, even if it was just a human being doing that, that would be horrifying, let alone if it was something else, something paranormal. And so if you want to check out my video about my experience, it's on my channel called What I Saw in My Room Still Haunts Me. It's eerily similar to the one that I just described of the 17-year-old in Oregon. And so I'd love to hear in the comments what you think was doing all that tapping, and if it's possible that was just some person screwing with this poor kid, or maybe it was something else. So let me know in the comments, and I'll try to get back to as many people as I possibly can. If you haven't already, please, if you like this story, gently obliterate the like button and subscribe. Today marks the beginning of our annual Scare-a-thon, where for the entire month of October, all I do is tell you true, scary campfire stories. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to sing at the Like Button's wedding for free, and then when it's time for their first dance, sing a rendition of Du Hast by Rammstein in an Australian accent. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In June of 2019, an 18-year-old girl named Bella wrapped up her first year in college and headed home for the summer. Her family lived just outside of this small town in France that was tucked up in the mountains and surrounded by this huge forest. And so growing up, Bella spent a lot of her time out in this forest, either by herself or with her father or other members of her family. And so she knew the forest like the back of her hand. Her favorite place to go in this forest was the man-made lake that sat kind of at the center of this forest. It wasn't huge, but it was a beautiful view. It was very peaceful, and so she liked going out there. The way she would get to it is she would leave her house, she would hop in her car, she would drive a couple of miles down the road, and she would pull off into the shoulder of this road, and there was no signage that said this was the pull-off to get to the man-made lake. This was an area that she and her family had discovered, that there was this particular trail you could take. And so she would pull off at this shoulder, she would get out, and she would turn away from the road and just walk directly into the trees, which butted right up against the road. And very quickly, after walking into the woods, after going through some thick underbrush, she would reach this kind of clearing, and she would see up ahead this little stream. And off to the left side of this stream is what looked like this kind of beaten up little footpath, but actually what it was an animal trail. So animals just kind of made their way around this area all the time, and so it kind of carved out a path. And so Bella would walk down to this animal path, and she would walk along the path that kind of went parallel with the stream, and she would walk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes until this animal path veered hard to the left, kind of went away from the stream. At that point, Bella would abandon the animal path and just continue walking along this stream, both stepping in the stream on some rocks and standing on either side when she could. And she would follow the stream due north, just going straight into the heart of this forest for about an hour, walking at a fairly leisurely pace until the stream connected with this east to west running river. And at this point, Bella would turn left, facing west, and she would follow along this riverbank about 20 minutes until the river fed into the man-made lake. And so she would stay at this lake, sitting on a rock, enjoy the view and look at the animals and listen to nature all around her. And then at some point she would turn around and retrace her steps all the way back to her car. For reference, one leg of this journey from car to lake, or from lake to car, took about 2 hours. Part of the reason Bella really enjoyed being in these woods and being at this lake was because it just kind of felt like they were hers. Because up until this summer in 2019, the only other people that Bella had ever seen anywhere in this forest or near this lake were other members of her family. So it really felt very private. So in June of that year, Bella comes home from college, and almost immediately she wants to go out to the man-made lake because she hasn't been in months. She's been in school, and so she's eager to get back to some place that she kind of considered to be her happy place. So one morning she gets up early, and by herself she leaves her house, she hops in her car, she drives the couple miles down the road, she pulls off onto that shoulder, she parks her car, she hops out, she turns away from the road, she walks into the forest, she finds the stream and starts walking along that animal path right to the side of the stream. She walks for a few minutes until she reaches the point where the trail kind of cuts to the left, and she just stays on the stream and is just continuing walking along the stream. And about 30 minutes later, when she was maybe 1 or 2 miles short of the east-west running river, she hears a bell somewhere off in the distance, way out in front of her, out towards the river. It sounds just like a chime, a single chime. And as soon as she hears it, she stops because there's never any people out here ever, and that bell sound came from somewhere in the forest. And so she stops because she's not really sure if she actually heard that, because it could have just been her mind playing tricks on her or something. And so she stops and just kind of listens for a second, and then she starts to hear this bell just continuously start ringing. Now, the ringing was not uniform. It was constant, but it was kind of sporadic, as if you were holding a bell and kind of ringing it randomly, like you might see at a sports game. And so she's thinking to herself, is there a dog that got lost somewhere up ahead and it's got a bell on its collar, and that's the sound I'm hearing? But as she's sitting there listening to this kind of sporadic bell sound, she's thinking, that's way too loud to be some rinky-dink bell on a pet's collar. So it's got to be something more robust. Did maybe somebody have a bell inside of a box, and that box got on the river and it's floated down river and it's like crashing into rocks or something? I mean, she's going through these very strange scenarios in her head, but she's not concerned about the bell. She's actually pretty intrigued, and since the sound of this bell seemed to be coming from the direction she was already traveling, she decided she would just keep on walking and hopefully see whatever it was that was causing this bell sound. And so Bella just began walking along the stream again, kind of listening to this bell and thinking about what it was going to be. And after about 5 minutes of her starting to walk again, the bell just stops. It goes totally silent. And when it does, it actually kind of startles Bella because she'd been listening to it so intently. And so she stops and she's listening, kind of expecting it to go off some more, but it doesn't. All she hears are the sounds of nature all around her. Now, Bella didn't have an explanation for what the spell was or why it stopped, but she really just wasn't that worried about it. She figured there was some sort of explanation for it. There had to be. And so she just kind of shrugged and kept on walking and put her focus back on getting to the lake. About 10 or 15 minutes later, Bella was still walking along the stream. She was still maybe a half mile or a mile short of the east to west running river when she sees up ahead on the left side of the stream as she's walking, there appears to be something laying on the ground that looks like it could be an animal or a rock. She doesn't really know what it is. And as she gets closer, she realizes it's a beaver laying on the ground, and this beaver is missing its head. Now, this is a huge forest, and Bella would have known that, of course, there are wild animals all over the place, and so finding the body of an animal that had been attacked by another animal was not unusual. That's nature. But what did strike Bella as odd was the cut on this beaver's neck was unbelievably neat and uniform, as if its head had been very carefully removed with a very sharp knife. And the beaver's head was nowhere to be found. It certainly did not have the appearance of having its head removed from some predator and its teeth. That would have been very rough. Also, the rest of the beaver's body was intact. So whatever killed this beaver was not interested in eating the beaver. As Bella stood over this beaver and was just staring at it, she also noted that there was no smell. Normally, when something dies, it begins to smell very quickly. It's part of the decomposition process. And so for there not to be a smell indicated to Bella that this beaver must have been killed fairly recently. And then when Bella kind of gently prodded the body with her foot, she realized the beaver's body was still fairly limp. So rigor mortis had not set in. Rigor mortis is another part of the decomposition process where the body kind of stiffens up, and that happens fairly soon after death. And so as Bella is realizing this beaver must have died very recently, it dawns on her that most likely whoever or whatever has killed this beaver
is probably somewhere nearby. And Bella can't help but connect this dead beaver to that bell she was hearing earlier, which before meant nothing, but considering the bell was roughly coming from the same area where this beaver has now been found, it made her uneasy. And so Bella found herself whipping her head around, looking out into the trees, seeing if, there's some person, a hunter or somebody that would kind of explain what was going on, but there was nothing. And so Bella felt herself starting to panic a little bit, but then she stopped herself and said, "Calm down. It's broad daylight. I have been coming to these woods for years and years. I've never seen another person. I've never encountered some predatory animal. I'm sure everything is perfectly fine. I got nothing to worry about." And so she stepped over the beaver and kept on walking. Bella would eventually reach the east-west running river. She would turn left and walk for 20 minutes alongside this river. She'd reach the man-made lake. She enjoyed the beautiful view and the scenery. And then at some point she turned around and began retracing her footsteps. She walked past the beaver on the ground all the way back to her car, and she went home. A week later, Bella was sitting around her house when she felt pretty bored and decided kind of abruptly that in order to cure her boredom, she would go back to the place she loved so much, the man-made lake. And so she told her parents where she was going, and then she left the house, hopped in her car, drove to the pull-off and parked and entered the woods at 6 p.m. Sunset that night was at 9 p.m. and so Bella knew this would need to be a fairly quick turnaround so she didn't get trapped in the woods in the dark. And so Bella finds the animal trail. She follows along the stream until the trail goes left and she stays on the stream. She continues walking on the stream when she starts to hear the distant sound of thunder. And so she looks up into the sky through the trees and she can see the sky is starting to get dark, but she's still a couple of hours away from sunset. And so between the thunder and the dark skies, she knows a storm is rolling in. But she is determined to get to that lake. And so instead of, turning around and saying, okay, I'll come back another time, she just starts jogging along the stream to get there as fast as she possibly can. And almost immediately as she's jogging, the raindrops start to fall. And by the time she passes the beaver corpse on the ground, it hadn't moved, the rain was really coming down. And then about 15 minutes after the corpse, when she hit the east-west running river, that's when the rain was at a full downpour. Still, Bella turned at the river and continued west towards the man-made lake as if she was going to go all the way, but only about a minute or two into this final leg. She still had about 20 minutes to get to the lake. She stops herself and she looks at her watch and she can see it's after 8 o'clock already. And she's thinking to herself, if I turn around right now, it's going to take me over an hour to get back to my car. Sunsets at 9 p.m. It's after 8 p.m. now. So already I know I'm going to have to navigate this forest at night in the dark, even if it's just for a little bit at the end. And if I go all the way to the lake and then come all the way back to the car, I'm going to be in the forest after dark for quite a while, maybe up to an hour. And she's thinking, I'm confident I can do that, but it's also pouring rain, I'm cold. If I get lost, this could turn into a very bad situation. And so she ultimately decides that even though she really wants to keep going, she needs to turn around, she needs to head back. And so she turns around and she walks back up alongside this east-west running river to where the stream fed into that river. She turns and begins walking south along this stream, headed back towards the car. On her walk, because the visibility was starting to get quite bad because it was so dark, she had her head down at the ground because she didn't want to trip. She's stepping on rocks, she's stepping on muddy areas. She wants to make sure her footing is solid. And so her head is down, the rain is pounding all around her, and she's walking for about 15 minutes when all of a sudden something hits her in the top of the head. And so reflexively, she looks up and kind of puts her hands in front of her face to protect herself, and she sees what she had just run into. It was the beaver corpse. It was hanging from a string that was dangling off a branch right above her. And this beaver's head had been retrieved and the head had been stitched onto the front paws of this beaver. And so she's looking at this beaver that's dangling from this rope. It's carrying its own head and she's walked square into it. And her first reaction was basically to gag. She was going to vomit. She was so disgusted. And then she began frantically rubbing at her hair where this thing had made contact with her because there could be juices from the decomposition that got on her. And then after frantically kind of patting at her head for a second, she stops and something really terrifying dawns on her. Whoever strung this beaver up to this tree and then stitched its head onto its paws, they had done that in the last 30 minutes because 30 minutes earlier when she was on her way in, she remembered passing the beaver carcass on the ground. She saw it. It had not moved from where it was the week before when she first saw it. And now this beaver is strung up in the tree. And so as the wheels are turning in Bella's head, head, she realizes that if someone has just done this, then they are probably nearby. And at this point, it's really starting to get dark. The rain is pounding all around her, and she starts whipping her head around, looking in all directions to see if there's someone out there that did this. But as she's looking, all she sees is just dark forest in all directions. And she knows she's at least 1 hour, even if she runs from her car. And so suddenly she is totally panicked, and in an effort to calm herself down, she says to herself, okay, I need to get out of here, but I have to walk. If I start running right now, this is going to turn into a complete nightmare. I just have to try to walk. And so she walks around this dangling beaver corpse and starts walking along the stream. And as soon as she's past that corpse, she feels the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She can hear movement behind her. She doesn't know what it is. It could be a deer, it could be some animal, but she's too afraid to turn around. And even though she was trying to tell herself to calm down, just keep walking, you're safe, you're freaking yourself out, everything is okay, as she's walking, she could feel herself starting to speed up until finally she was just running down the stream, sprinting actually away from this beaver and whatever it was that was moving around in that area. And at some point, she got so winded from sprinting so fast that she came to a stop, maybe 5 or 6 minutes after seeing this beaver. And as soon as she comes to a stop and she's walking, she still hasn't turned around yet, she hears the sound of that bell. And right away, it's the exact same sound she had heard the week before. It's that kind of constant, sporadic sound of someone ringing a bell. But in her panic state, she doesn't know where it's coming from. She's so scared. Her anxiety is so high. She doesn't know if it's behind her or if it's off to the side. It's now completely dark out. And so she is full-blown terrified. There is someone or something behind her that has strung this beaver up that's probably watching her, and she can't see them. Even though she's beyond winded, she can barely breathe. She just starts sprinting as fast as she can. And as she's stumbling and falling on the rocks and tripping because she's not really looking where she's going, in the background and all around her, she's hearing this bell chiming and she's hearing something moving around in the woods behind her. And she pulls her phone out of her pocket, her iPhone, and as she's running, she dials her father. She puts the phone to her ear. She's crying. She's panting. She can barely breathe. Her father picks up and she's so relieved to hear his voice, but she can't even make a sentence. She just starts crying and wailing and pleading with him, Dad, come out to the forest. Meet me at the spot where the trail veers away from the stream. Meet me there. There's someone in the forest that's chasing me and I can't see them. Her father on the other end of the phone, he didn't know what to make of this, but he could hear the primal fear in his daughter's voice. And so he didn't ask any questions. He said, stay on the line. I'm coming to meet you right now. So Bella's father and mother, with Bella on the line, they run out of their house. They hop in their car. They speed the couple miles down the road. They park next to their daughter's car. And as they're running into the woods, they can hear way off in the woods the sound of the bell. They can hear the bell. They hear their daughter screaming on the phone. They can hear the bell coming through the phone, and she's begging them to please come into the woods, come in here, save me. And so the parents run into the woods and they begin running up the stream. Meanwhile, Bella, who's way out in the woods, she's still 10 or 15 minutes away from her parents. She is barely able to run at this point. She's exhausted almost all of her energy, and as she's getting closer and closer to her parents, the sporadic bell sound is getting louder and louder and louder, like whatever it is gaining on her. And she can hear behind her all these sticks and branches. They're breaking as if something is coming up to her. And finally, when it feels like this bell is right behind her head, she just kind of stops in defeat. She's too far away from her parents. She can't get to them in time. And so it was almost like she had to turn around and finally look at whatever it was that was behind her. And so terrified beyond words, Bella, who can barely breathe, she's so scared and so tired, she slowly turns around. Now, when she turns around and she's facing the other direction, she's looking across this clearing. She just happened to run past this clearing, and because it was a clearing, there was a little bit of moonlight that was coming down through the trees, just enough to illuminate this space that was about 50 feet wide. And as she's looking across this clearing, at first, she doesn't see anything. And then this tall, dark figure walks into the clearing, and as soon as it steps in, she can see it's got a bell at its waist. And with every step it took, it would violently ring the bell, causing the ringing sound. And so this thing starts moving into the clearing, and as Bella is staring at it, it was like time slowed down. She could not process what she was looking at. She didn't know what she was looking at. All she knew is whatever or whoever this is, they're coming straight at me. And so Bella suddenly got this unbelievable adrenaline rush. It was like her body went into autopilot to save her, and she turned around and began sprinting faster than she had ever sprinted in her life. And as she ran, all she could hear was the sound of that bell, which she now knew represented represented steps this thing was taking. And so the bell was getting faster and faster and louder, and she knew it was gaining on her, and she began lying and screaming out loud that, "I'm on the phone with the police, they're right up ahead, they're gonna be here any moment." But whatever it was that was behind her, they weren't phased. They were just charging ahead, gaining on her second by second. Meanwhile, her parents had made it to the meeting spot, but her father, he felt like, I can't just sit here, and he just starts charging into the woods. He can hear his daughter screaming, he can hear this bell getting louder and louder, and he just starts running towards it. And sure enough, seconds later, he sees his daughter come bounding out of the forest, and she leaps into his arms. He just grabs her, turns around, and runs with her back to the meeting spot. He grabs his wife, and the three of them just charge out of the forest, back to the parking lot, back in their car, and they speed off. In the car, all of them are crying. They don't know what to make of what just happened. Bella's trying to describe it, but she can't. And her parents, they had been on the phone listening to their daughter screaming, and all they kept saying to each other, the parents, was, "I heard the bell. I heard the bell. I heard the bell," as if the bell confirmed their worst nightmares, that there really was someone or something out in those woods that was trying to do harm to their child. They would drive straight to the police station where Bella would file a report about what she experienced out in the forest, and then afterwards her parents, as a precaution, took her to the hospital where she was determined to be okay, besides some bumps and bruises from falling down. The following morning, the police went out to the forest, to the area where Bella had explained where she had been, and they searched all along that animal foot trail and all along the stream, but they never found any sign of this dark figure with the bell. Bella would tell police that she had a handbag, and as she was running back, she dropped the bag. She remembered where she dropped it along the stream, but when the police went to that area, the bag was gone. Also, the beaver was no longer there. It was not tied up to the tree, it was not on the ground, it was gone. The only thing police found that was out of the ordinary was they found a little ways off from the stream, basically along the path that Bella would have been running on, they found a t-shirt neatly folded placed underneath a rock. But the police and Bella and her family have no idea what that signifies. Ultimately, the police told Bella and her family that more than likely what she ran into was some kind of mentally unstable person that was living out in the woods, and perhaps when Bella came into the woods, they felt like she was on their property, and so they kind of tried to scare her off. But Bella has a hard time accepting that. She felt like, as she was running from whoever was behind her, that she was in mortal danger. That had it not been for her father running into the woods and literally grabbing her and running with her the rest of the way, that she may not have gotten out of the woods at all, that she might have been attacked and killed by whoever this was. She also can't help, when she looks back at the entire experience, thinking about that moment when she turned around and looked across that clearing and saw this figure come into the moonlight for the first time, that when it came into the moonlight, the way it was moving, the steps it was taking, they weren't normal, they were abnormal. There was just something off about this thing's movement, that it didn't seem like she was looking at a person, but rather some big animal. But regardless, since her ordeal, there have been no strange sightings out in those woods. However, almost no one ever goes in those woods except for Bella and her family, and Bella and her family, they don't go in those woods anymore. So whoever or whatever is out there is still just out there. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it. And if you're the first person to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to sing at the Like Button's wedding, and then when it's time for them to have their first dance, sing a rendition of Du Hast by Rammstein in an Australian accent. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads.